Yes, this is class for Tuesday, April 7th. How you doing? I bet you're getting stir crazy like me, and I'm thinking, how long can this go on? What do I do with my time? Well, I work outside in the garden to get outside. Harvested lettuce already, planted a second crop of lettuce, planted snow peas. That's another spring thing. So I do that sort of thing. The only place I really go is the supermarket, and even there, I'm like, wow, we're not supposed to be around people, and there's a lot of people in this supermarket. I see GW has canceled face-to-face classes in the summer, and then the question becomes, what's going to happen in the fall? Do we really think this virus is going to disappear by August when the fall semester starts? We won't have a vaccine. Are we going to continue this on into the fall semester? We'll see. Those decisions are made way above my pay grade. Now, for today, I want to finish up talking about correlational research designs or the questionnaire survey. Remember, we looked at a person has certain hypotheses they want to test, and they're going to use a questionnaire to test it. Oh, an example might be the gender gap, that men and women vote differently in presidential elections. So you have your questions you want to ask people, and then you have to choose a sample. We looked at sampling and how you choose your sample from a sampling frame. Then what you have to do is you have to give your questionnaire to the people that are called respondents, the people in your sample that have been chosen to be in your sample. And you have to answer the question, how are you going to present the questionnaire to the respondents? Think about it. Have you ever participated in survey research or questionnaire or poll? There are really three main ways, and kind of another one emerging as a fourth way to present a questionnaire to your respondents. Uh, the first way is you can go up to people and talk to them personally, the personal interview. Uh, that's a way, that's an old way. That's the way George Gallup used years ago. And we'll see that there are certain advantages and disadvantages to doing a personal interview. Another way you might present the questionnaire to the respondents is through a mail questionnaire. You can mail it to them. Certain advantages and disadvantages to doing it that way. A third technique, and one that's probably most commonly used now, is telephone survey. You call them up, they got the questions, you ask them the questions, they answer them, you record their answers. That's a real popular way to present the questionnaire to the respondents. Now, a fourth way that's been emerging, and I've been watching it the last 5 years or so, is to do it through email. And people that like technology and the way we're moving, they think that's probably the future. But there are disadvantages. Think in your mind, what are the disadvantages to an email questionnaire? Well, you send it out to people. It's real easy to do that. That's an advantage, right? It's cheap. You send it out to them, then you get a certain number back, and you have to think, the people who received it in your sample, are they a cross-section representation of the population you're interested in? And the major question for a email questionnaire is probably not. Think of the biases that are involved when you communicate through email with people. Biases like age. Older people are not as conversant with the technology. They don't respond that much to email kinds of surveys as younger people do. So you introduce a bias into your sample that you have. Remember, introducing a bias in the sample is what killed the Literary Digest and which made George Gallup the father of scientific polling. You have to have a representative sample. So if you have an age bias, that's a problem. Another bias you have, if you do it through email, is there's a social economic status bias to using this technology. This has come up with this COVID-19 problem. All the schools around the Washington area in Virginia, D.C., and Maryland, they're closed. Well, the universities can do distant learning because the people there are pretty conversant with the technology, just like we're using it now. However, in all the families that have kids going from kindergarten to the 12th grade, Can you really do distant learning? That's the problem. And a number of school systems have said, well, our higher social economic status kids have the technology, they're conversant with the technology, they could continue. However, lower social economic status families don't have the technology and don't have this kind of knowledge. So that if a school system carries on through distant learning through the internet to try to carry on the semester, it's a disadvantage to poor families. And I've seen an announcement from a number of school systems that we can't do that. We can't disadvantage lower social economic status kids, so we're not going to do it in this way. So I'm bringing this up because this shows that it's not representative when you use an email. You don't get a good representative sample. Now, there's an organization that's kind of staked its future. It's built on this idea that the email is the way we're going to go in the future. It's an organization, I don't know if you've heard of them, SurveyMonkey. Of course, they're in California where all the high-tech people try to start. And they've been going at it for about 20 years, and they got vigorously into electioneering kind of polling for the 2014 election. What they did is they do their survey through email, and in 2014, they did a kind of secret study and then released the results when they were done with it. What they did was they completed 125,000 people emailed about the election, and they were interested in senator races and governor races for the governorship in states. There were 72 races that they surveyed using their email techniques, and SurveyMonkey reported that they correctly predicted 69 of the 72 races. So, and they claim that they're closer than many pollsters. So this organization thinks this is the future of polling and presenting the questionnaire to people. We'll see how it develops. Now, let's go back to the three traditional ways of presenting the questionnaire to the respondents. And they had to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of those different techniques. Let's talk about the mail questionnaire first. You send out your questionnaire, you mail it to people, they fill it out and send it back to you. That's the strategy here in the mail questionnaire. The advantages of a mail questionnaire. Think in your minds, what advantages are there to doing it this way rather than through phone calls or personal interviews? Well, the number one advantage for a mail questionnaire is it's cheap. When I was a graduate student, I wanted to do a questionnaire, a poll of professors who teach comparative politics in American universities that offer an advanced degree in political science. I was interested in what connection is there between the personal politics of a person who teaches comparative politics and the answer they have to various issues that we disagree about as comparativists. And I was interested in the techniques that we use in comparative politics. Are they somehow connected with the personal politics of a professor? Well, I wanted to do a sample of 500 professors, and I found that the only way I could do it as a poor graduate student without any funding was through the mail, a mail questionnaire. So in a mail questionnaire, you got to have your postage sending it out, you got to have the postage coming back, and then you got to print it off. It was pretty cheap to get the university printer to print these things off for me for free. You need envelopes for about $1 a person. I could send out a questionnaire like that. That's cheap. And that's the big advantage to the mail questionnaire. It's cost. A second advantage for a mail questionnaire is it eliminates the bias introduced by the interviewer. Remember, we said that when a person is doing an interview of another person, the answers they get can be biased by the characteristics of the people doing the interview. Interviewer bias. You eliminate that by doing a mailing and mailing out the questionnaire, so you don't have that problem. Another advantage for a mail questionnaire, it's relatively anonymous. That is, people can answer questions that are sensitive more readily when they write the answers rather than telephone or personal interview. So it has that advantage to it. Another advantage to the mail questionnaire is it's open-ended in terms of time. If there are questions in which people have to think a while about something, a mail questionnaire lets them think about it. They don't feel the pressure to continue to go as you feel in a telephone interview or a personal interview. And finally, uh, since almost everybody but the homeless has an address, there's great accessibility to people using the mail questionnaire. So you can randomly send out your 1,200 randomly chosen addresses and get your sample in that way. Now, those are the advantages to mail questionnaire. There are certain weaknesses to doing a mail survey. Let's talk about the weaknesses. Number one, you must make the questions simple if you're going to do a mail questionnaire. I ran into problems when with my scope and methods class, we did an exit survey when a year of an election some years ago. And people would come out and we would give them a questionnaire that they would fill out and we'd collect it. And then we tried to see how close could we predict how the election came out. Well, we found that we wanted a question where people rank issues. What's the most important issue now? The second, the third. And people just didn't understand the question when they were reading it, and they filled it out wrong. So we had problems with that. I think if we would have done a personal interview, we could have asked people, and when they weren't sure about the question, we could have clarified it for them. So you got that disadvantage in a mail questionnaire. You have to have your questions simple because if people are confused, you can't help them sort out what you mean. Another disadvantage in a mail questionnaire is you cannot probe. Probing is when somebody doing a personal interview of you, they're not sure about your answer, and they probe so you can clarify it. There's that kind of interaction. You don't have that interaction at all in a mail questionnaire, so you can't probe. Another disadvantage to a mail questionnaire is you can't control who fills out the questionnaire. You send it to a certain address, somebody fills it out and sends it back. Sometimes you want to control who fills out the questionnaire. I knew someone who was doing research on on members of the House of Representatives. Well, you send the mail questionnaire to them at their office at the U.S. Capitol building, and you know what? I bet a staffer's probably filling it out and sending it back. You don't want the staffer to fill it out. This is not a questionnaire about staffers. It's about God, there's my phone. Let me get it. If you wanted to really do the congressman, a mail questionnaire was not the way to do it. They're busy and their staffers do a lot of things like that. Another disadvantage to the mail questionnaire, you can't control the environment in which a person fills out the questionnaire. Uh, the environment can change people's moods and how they fill it out, and you can't really control that when you're doing a mail questionnaire. Now, the big disadvantage to a mail questionnaire is the low response rate. You send out all these questionnaires, what percent do you get back? Well, I know I get questionnaires in the mail. I fill them out sometimes because I'm interested in this methodology. But I think a lot of people probably are like me. I pick up my mail, I have a stack of mail, I separate it into things I'm going to look at and things I immediately throw away. And a lot of the mail questionnaires get thrown away. So you have this low response rate. And if you have only 30% of the people mail back the questionnaire, you've got to think, God, the other 70%, they might be different. That the 30% is not a representative sample. This is the biggest disadvantage to doing a mail questionnaire. Now, the question becomes, how can you increase the response rate? You'd like to get the response rate up to at least 50% in a mail questionnaire. What can you do about it? Well, first of all, you have to be careful about it, but your cover letter. You send a cover letter that explains what this is about. If you're doing research for an esteemed place like the George Washington University and the pursuit of truth, you got to emphasize that in the cover letter. People are more likely to send back a questionnaire for something like that rather than you're doing a questionnaire for General Motors, trying to find out from Chevy Cruze people that bought a Chevy Cruze, why they like or dislike their car. With that kind of remunerative and that profit-seeking motive, it's not as noble as when you're doing research. So you got to bring that up. Uh, Also, you can increase the response rate if you offer the respondents some kind of prize or something. It was the Brits who came up with the idea. If you send back this questionnaire, your name goes in a raffle, and they choose a name out of a raffle if you send it back. So you have a chance to win, say, a trip to Las Vegas or something like that. Uh, I've also giving people some kind of incentive to send back their questionnaire. I got a questionnaire that had a penny taped to it with the ad, a penny to your thought, a penny for your thoughts. Please send this thing back and take the penny. Uh, uh, these are the sorts of things you do to try to incentivize people to send it back. Another incentive might be if you send back and fill out this questionnaire, we'll send you what the results are of the questionnaire. This helps when you're looking at a population in which people are interested in the topic at hand. Like, say, the 45,000 people that belong to the Porsche Club of America. If you send out 1,200 of these questionnaires and you tell people, we'll send you the results of it if you fill it out. Well, people that are in the Porsche Club are interested in their cars. They want to know what the other people think of this, say, the new electric car that's coming out by Porsche. They want to know what changing the 911 engine from air-cooled to water-cooled, what people think about that. So you can increase your questionnaire response rate by promising people you'll send them the results of it. Another way to increase your response rate is to make it shorter. A long questionnaire, people are more likely to throw it out. I know the American Political Science Association, they sent me a questionnaire. It was about 20 pages long. It sat on my desk. It sat on my desk. God, I wasn't filling it out because I got other things to do with my time. If it were shorter, I might have picked it up right away and jumped right into it. You you have to also have your type of mailing has to be quality. That is, it has to look good and professional. And you got to send them an envelope with a self-addressed stamped envelope. You got to send them that. They're not going to pay the postage to send them back. So you got to do that sort of thing. And finally, I would say you can increase your response rate if you send follow-ups, they're called. That is, you send out the questionnaire, you're going to get some back, and then after a certain period of time, the people who have not filled out the questionnaire, you send them another one, and you prod them a little bit, and you'll get another group that'll send it back. That's using the follow-ups to do that sort of thing. So these are the disadvantages for a mail questionnaire. Now, also you can do a personal interview, and let's kind of compare the personal interview to a mail questionnaire. What advantages do you think there are if you choose to do the personal interview route of mating up the respondents with the questionnaire? First of all, a personal interview has more flexibility. The mail questionnaire is rigid. There's no chance for human interaction. On a personal interview, now you have that. A personal interview also allows the researcher to control the situation of data gathering. So that's important for some people. Also, the big advantage to a personal interview over a mail questionnaire is the higher response rate. People are much more likely to answer questions when a researcher comes up to them and asks them questions than they are to throw away a mail questionnaire. Uh, People feel uncomfortable saying no to people that come up to them. That's the technique used by beggars I think, at the traffic lights in Washington when they come up to you and they ask you for something. It's harder to turn them down than it is, say, to just throw away a mailing that people might send to you. So they have this higher response rate. Plus, the personal interviewer can collect information about the respondents. I know the American National Election Study done at the University of Michigan. When the interview is over, the person that did the interview writes down, were they very articulate, things about how healthy do they look, et cetera, et cetera. All this information that you get when you do a personal interview. Now, how about the disadvantages of a personal interview compared to a mail questionnaire? Well, the number one disadvantage is it's expensive to do personal interviews. Say I talked about I wanted to do 500 professors who teach comparative politics in the United States in universities that offer a graduate degree in political science. Well, what if I was to do rather than I did a mail questionnaire, what if I was to do a personal interview? Well, I'd have to randomly choose 500 professors from all over the United States. Some of them might be in California, some of them might be in Hawaii, some of them in New York. Can you imagine how expensive it would be to do personal interviews and to go to those places and do that? Mail questionnaire is much cheaper. So you got big expenses when you're doing that personal interview. Plus, uh, the interviewer introduces a bias with respect to the respondents. So that's a disadvantage. And also, another disadvantage of the personal interviewer is that the respondents cannot remain anonymous. And sometimes this is important for sensitive topics like illegal activity on the part of people, like taking drugs, their sex lives and the details of their sex lives, which became important when AIDS came on the scene and it was connected with people's sex lives. Another disadvantage of personal interviewers is you cannot be assured of the safety of the people doing the research. I mean, you go to a place and you're doing an interview where there's high crime rate, and you can't be sure of the safety of the person doing the personal interview. Now, the final way to bring the questionnaire to the attention and get the respondents to fill it out would be the telephone survey. And this has been really the growth area the last 50 or 60 years in the United States. When George Gallup did polling, he couldn't really use telephone surveys because not everybody had telephones. A lot of people didn't have telephones, right? And that as that technology became widespread in the United States, now you could count on not having a bias by doing a personal interview. Uh, so the telephone interview became real important. Now you can uh, you can get 97% of the people by doing a telephone interview in the United States. So that's pretty good. And an advantage of the telephone survey is it's cheaper than personal interviews. It's not as cheap as the mail questionnaire, but you have actual interaction with people in the telephone survey. So you don't have that problem of the low response rate in the mail questionnaire. The response rate of people doing telephone interviewing is about the same as doing a personal interview. So that's pretty good. And also, an advantage is that you can do random digit dialing to get a random sample. That's an advantage to the telephone survey and doing that. Some disadvantages to telephone surveys. Many people just hang up when they get tired of the interview. I know I always try to participate when I've chosen to be a respondent. I think in the discussion, on the discussion board and Blackboard, you should bring out and tell me if you've ever participated in any kind of questionnaire. I do, and they always call around dinner time. That's probably when people are home, when I'm cooking, 6 o'clock or so. And I always say yes and I participate. But as it goes on to be 10, 15, 20 minutes, I'm like, wait a minute, this interview has to end. I'm going to ruin my ragu sauce if I keep doing this sort of thing. So what happens in a long telephone interview that you'll have missing data for the questions that come later in it. That's a problem. And the telephone interviewer also cannot observe the respondents, so that's a disadvantage. But what has become a disadvantage in telephone surveys is that it's harder and harder to get people to participate. In the 1960s, when someone that had to do telephone interviews of people, when they dialed 100 numbers, they could expect to get 65 interviewers. That's pretty good. That number dropped down, so now it's like 15 out of 100. So it's becoming more difficult to get through and to talk to people. So that people still do the telephone interviews, but it's problematic and it's more difficult. It's about the last I saw about $60,000 to do a telephone interview of 1,200 people. And then finally, it seems for some reason people don't like to talk about sensitive things on the telephone. What do they think people are listening to the telephone conversations for whatever? Uh, I knew a family member who once on the telephone I talked with him and he was talking about his tomato plants and how he was growing them and how they were doing. And I thought, he's not a He's not a gardener. What's going on with that? And as he told me more and more about the male and the female plants, there's no male and female tomato plants. It dawned on me he's growing pot. And he won't say that. He's calling them tomatoes over the telephone because he's afraid somebody's listening in on his conversation. So that is a disadvantage to doing the telephone interview. So the thing you come away with is you have these three kind of techniques to present the questionnaire to the respondents. There are disadvantages and advantages to each of them, and that's how their researcher chooses which one they will do. Now, you should go to the blackboard, go to the discussion board, make any comments, ask any questions. Tell me about any time that you've participated in an interview and how it went. Uh, Thank you, and I'll talk to you on Thursday.